What if a guy like Dennis Rader, Ted Bundy, or even David Berkowitz was born 30 or 40 years later and grew up in our digital age with easy access to not only explicit material, but online communities of people who shared, to some extent, some of their fantasies? Do you think that exposure and potential outlet could have made any difference, or possibly even changed the direction of the dark path they eventually followed? Okay, before I go any further, we have a little problem to address. I mean, this is YouTube, so I'm gonna need to put a few code words in place so I don't get in too much trouble. So let's just say instead of this word, I'll just say cheese. And instead of this word, I'll just use baloney. Tell you what, I'll even put a little legend down in the corner so you can keep it straight, okay? It's funny that I can, talk about all the stuff I've talked about on this channel without much of a problem, but you try to talk about this topic, cheese, and they shut you down quick. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's talk about bologna and cheese. If you're looking for bologna, let's be honest, it's very, very easy to find, right? Whatever floats your boat. I mean, just look at this article. Whatever you can possibly think of has been fetishized, and somebody has probably made a video about it that you can find in under 2 minutes online via Google search. It's that easy. But that wasn't always the case. Not even that long ago, to get your fix, you'd have to be, brave enough to peel back some heavy curtain, like this at the back of your video rental store and venture into the adult section with its slimy, oversized VHS boxes, praying that you wouldn't bump into somebody you know on the way out. And if you turn the clock back even further, to the late 60s or early 70s, you had to be really dedicated and resourceful. Mail order catalogs, CD XXX theaters, or even live peep shows in places like Times Square. You fast forward back to the 21st century, and it's big business. According to the statistics compiled by the AVN, that's the Adult Video News, the baloney industry, hailing primarily from the San Fernando Valley, was raking in over $12.6 billion annually by the year 2005. Compare that to just $8.9 billion a few miles down the road in Tinseltown. Now, the validity of those statistics is apparently in question, but regardless, a ton of money. And that boom is not just limited to content, but sites dedicated to building and fostering communities of people with shared cheese interests. Basically like how Facebook was in 2010, but for kink. Add friends, join groups, post photos. If you want someone to kick you down a flight of stairs while you're dressed like a 15th century Renaissance man, the avenue to make that fantasy a reality is literally just a few clicks away. Why? Because everybody likes cheese, right? I mean, you know the expression, cheese sells. Well, unfortunately, there's a dark side too. A lot, not all, but a lot of serial killers' motivations can be traced back to cheese. It's not the kill itself that gives them the thrill, it's fulfilling some other dark desire. Just to make something clear here, I'm not comparing the horrible crimes and actions of these people to that of a 50 Shades fan or the greater adult industry or fetish community. But I do have some questions. And that's what these videos are all about, right? Exploring possibilities. Getting a conversation going with all of you cornflakes down in the comments. That's always the best part. So make sure that you let me know what you think of all of this too. And in the meantime, let's look at a few examples. Now, it wouldn't be one of my videos without BTK. Why do you think a guy like Dennis Rader had to haul a Polaroid camera and tripod out into the woods, dress himself up in women's clothing, bury himself in shallow graves, tie himself up with leotards. You know, his infamous selfies. I think part of the answer is as disturbing as it is informative. He needed to make his own baloney. Specifically, bondage baloney. For a few reasons, I would imagine. Number one, secrecy. Dennis was very careful to keep his depraved desires hidden. There's some indication that his wife caught him once or twice dressed up like this. But still, it wasn't like he was gonna ask her to take the photos for him. Why? Because number two, shame. I bet back in the 70s, without an easy way to find others with shared interests, it could be easy to feel a great sense of shame. That you were alone in your desires. Some sort of freak. I mean, I guess we'll never truly know the extent of which he confided in his wife, but from all I've read, I don't think they were exploring any of Dennis's desires consensually together. Let's put it that way. And number three, accessibility. Like I mentioned earlier, it just wasn't easy to get your hands on specific material. So I guess why not make your own baloney? But again, in the early 70s, even that was a lot of work to come away with only 4 or 5 Polaroids. No iPhone on burst, folks. So if we could transplant a younger Dennis into today with the internet, I'm sure he would have found his way onto Baloney Hub or X videos, and there certainly is no shortage of material there. This article from Cosmo lists BDSM as number 3 on their list of 55 kinks and fetishes you should absolutely know. I don't know why I need to know 55 fetishes. Seems like a lot, honestly, but whatever. So it defines BDSM as a catch-all acronym for several different aspects of the kink community. The B and D are for bondage and discipline, the D and S are for domination and submission, and the S and M are for sadism and masochism. Okay, so according to this chart over here on nowpatient.com, masochism is the number 1 most Googled fetish in the USA with over 4 million searches between April 2020 and April 2021. A little dated, sorry, I had trouble finding more current numbers. But I mean, plus this chart is just too handy. Sadism clocks in at number 4. And check this out here, okay? Down below here, we can even dial it in to Dennis's home state of Kansas and see that masochism is hitting at a rate of 90 searches per 10,000 people. So, while Dennis may have felt alone in some aspects of his interest, that certainly wasn't the case. But without the internet, how would he ever know that? He had to resort to taking 4 or 5 of his own photos, or even literally drawing his own baloney. Today, within seconds, he could find new, very hardcore, realistic content each and every day. He could join a website and chat with other people with similar desires. He could even have what they call play partners, which is actually pretty scary. It's a scary thought. Okay, so 1 second. Listen. I really don't want to scare anyone from safely engaging in consensual activities and participating on websites geared towards fetish life. It's not my intent. Just be safe, okay? I'm just wondering, could it be possible that having access to all of this could potentially have been enough to satiate his desires? Would it have changed anything at all? Because on the other hand, could it have made things worse? There are people out there that argue that access to baloney doesn't extinguish the fire at all. On the contrary, it fuels it. Let's listen to an expert. The night before his execution in 1989, Ted Bundy sat down for an interview. You can find it here on YouTube.
The issue is how this kind of literature contributed and helped mold and shape the kinds of violent behavior.
It fueled your fantasies.
Well, in the beginning, it fuels this kind of thought process. Then, at a certain time, it's instrumental in what I would say crystallizing it, making it into something which is almost like a separate entity inside.
Look at that. Comments turned off. I told you, baloney is a controversial topic. But you ask me, this is total BS. Even Bundy himself was contradicting previous statements of his own. And as this guy states in the comments of this other video on Bundy's baloney blaming, if created serial killers, we would be in serious trouble today. What about today? Maybe we are in serious trouble. This is Phillip Markoff, aka the Craigslist killer. For all this earlier talk of the internet offering a potential healthy and safe outlet, this guy flushes that theory right down the toilet. For God's sakes, he was called the Craigslist killer. Now, this is back in 2010 when the erotic services pages on Craigslist was still a thing. It was littered with personal ads like this. Phillip was a guy, a law student with potential, and his whole life ahead of him. Engaged to be married even. But he also harbored dark fantasies. Honestly, is he that much different from BTK? Two men of different generations with sorta similar dark, disturbing fantasies fueled by cheese sadism. Fantasies they kept secret from their partners. Compartmentalization. But unlike Dennis, Phillip grew up with the internet. He had this easy access, every opportunity to find a safe and consensual outlet for his fantasies. Instead, going by the clever username CheeseAddict5385, he used the internet and specifically the pages on Craigslist to find his victims. Baloney certainly wasn't enough for Phillip. Fortunately, Phillip shared something else in common with BTK. Both men were complete technological morons. BTK's kryptonite was a floppy disk, and Phillip apparently didn't understand that IP addresses were a thing. He was caught easily after 3 murders. I have a full episode on him if you're so inclined. I'll link it in the description and up here somewhere for you. So let's go back for a moment and look at this chart again. So what about those other 89 out of 10,000 people not named Dennis Rader searching sadism in Kansas? Or the 142 not named Phillip Markoff in Massachusetts? I mean, we didn't end up with 90 BTKs and 143 Craigslist killers, did we? But I mean, they're all searching, and you better believe finding violent baloney. If we go back to this Cosmo article for a second, it defines BDSM and states that all BDSM involves a consensual power exchange, which means a submissive partner consents to letting the dominant power take control through various scenes. So that paragraph contains 2 uses of a word that I think ruins everything for guys like Dennis and Ted. Consent. Now, there is actually a thing called consensual non-consent, or CNC for short. Crazy, I know. I looked it up, and it's what it sounds like when someone within a trusting dynamic consents to not have consent during a particular scene. According to a study that I found by social psychologist and researcher Dr. Justin Lemiller, in over 4,000 Americans surveyed on their cheese fantasy habits, 61% of people who identified as women and 54% of people who identified as men said they fantasize about being forced to have cheese. Wow. I gotta say, that's a lot higher than I would think. Don't you think? I mean, 61 and 54%? Wild. Okay, but for one, obviously that requires an insane amount of trust between 2 people, right? And 2, it still is consent. Guys like Dennis and Phillip, even Ted, might get by for a while surfing Baloney Hub and going to the odd convention and meet up every now and then. And, some CNC might cut it for a while. But eventually, they're gonna need more. I think it's like a drug, chasing that high. The ever-increasing need for more. Look at Jeffrey Dahmer, for example. Classic Escalation. He started out with just fantasies about the jogger, right? From there, he gets himself a mannequin. The mannequin was kind of like the gateway drug that they would warn you about in elementary school. After a while, that cold embrace of a plastic mannequin was no longer cutting it, so he moved on to picking up guys at a bar and then drugging them. And for a while, that seemed to work. But just like a drug, after a while, he wanted something more. And we all know what happened next. It's also why serial killers have what the FBI refers to as a cooling off period in between kills. Because again, like a drug, it has a half-life. Once the effect wears off, that desire starts to rebuild until it peaks and they have to go out and satisfy it again, just like an addiction. Maybe Bundy wasn't totally full of shit.
I would keep looking for more potent, more explicit, more graphic kinds of material.
And that is why, for someone like BTK, Phillip, Bundy, or even Dahmer, this goes well beyond just a fetish. If you're a big fan of 50 Shades or furry handcuffs, don't worry. No need to host a book burning. There's a big difference between a kink or fetish and a paraphilia. Sounds like a big word. I found this article on Psychology Today that sums it up pretty concisely. A paraphilia is a condition in which a person's arousal and gratification depend on fantasizing about and engaging in behavior that is atypical and extreme. In other words, a kink or a fetish can be something that a person kind of adds to their repertoire, like some additional spice, Salt Bae. They don't need it 100% of the time to feel truly satisfied. A paraphilia, on the other hand, it's not just a spice, it's the main course. They need it 100% of the time to feel satisfied. Still, if you find someone else consenting, that special someone who just needs to kick a 15th century Renaissance man, down the stairs to feel satisfied, seems to me like shouldn't be a problem, right? Behind closed doors and all that. But when things really do become a problem is when a paraphilia develops into a disorder. So the article continues. A paraphilia is considered a disorder when it causes distress or threatens to harm someone else. Ding, 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 ding. Yeah, people like BTK have a disorder of the worst order. Extreme paraphilic disorder. That's an understatement. Okay, so I've spent most of this video so far talking about finding bologna and cheese online. But there's an entire other side to this as well. A community of people out there who aren't looking for it. They're just mad about it. Like Elliot Rodger and friends.
Elliot Rodger here.
The term incel is derived from involuntarily celibate. According to good old Merriam-Webster, it means a person, usually a man, who regards himself or herself as being involuntarily celibate and typically expresses extreme resentment and hostility towards those who are active. The term really took off over in the wonderful pages of Reddit. Speaking of involuntarily celibate people. In the 2010s, a subreddit called r/incel. You know who else had a problem with so-called active couples? David Berkowitz. No, his dog didn't really tell him to do it. And yes, pretty sure he actually did act alone. So during the summer of '77, New York City was gripped by a killing spree that left 6 dead. After his arrest, Berkowitz expressed resentment for not receiving attention from women. So why don't we, you know what, let's transplant him into 2010. Does David Berkowitz just latch on to Andrew Tate and get really active on Reddit, posting terrible and misogynistic shit? Sure, but at least finding others like him to vent to and not resort to murdering cheesily active people? Or on the contrary, does it provide Berkowitz a better platform for his iconic letters, directly in front of the faces of the lost kids in these subreddits? He had a way with words. I mean, even this guy, the late, great Jimmy Breslin from the New York Daily News, said that Berkowitz had that cadence. I remember when I read it, I said, this guy could take my place with a column. He had that big city beat to his writing. It was sensational. I mean, listen to this shit.
Hello from the gutters of NYC, which are filled with dog manure, vomit, stale wine, urine, and blood. Hello from the sewers of NYC, which swallow up these delicacies when they are washed away by the sweeper trucks.
Sounds to me like the kind of stuff the involuntarily celibate would eat up on Reddit. Who knows? Maybe instead of that loser Tate, we would have ended up with Son of Sam running the manosphere. And maybe that results in even more deaths than in 77. So, what do you think? All of these people had their wires crossed. Something happened to them, right? They had some sort of early trauma that got mixed up with puberty and bam. I don't know. As I say, I'm no psychologist, and the examples I talked about are just a few of many, many people and possibilities. But you gotta wonder, with all the current focus on mental health, could these guys have been more open to the idea of seeking out help and discussing these dark, twisted fantasies with a mental health professional? Or I guess the big question is a person that far gone beyond help? By the time they realize they need help, is it already too late? Are there no circumstances in which they don't end up eventually acting on their depraved desires? It's a scary thought, isn't it? I don't know. Not to be too cheesy, but maybe I'm just full of baloney.